Hello, it's me. It's the 25th of September and this is the latest episode of Built from Scratch. I wasn't working yesterday and it's already 11:30 in the morning today because, as I think I've previously briefly mentioned, we're having an extension built on our house and we're actually moving in with my mum for several weeks whilst the second half of that build is completed. And yesterday was the day where we shifted a load of stuff out of our house as part of that, and I had to finish it off this morning too. So no work was done, which is a bit of a recurring theme since I've started up this project. I think that next week start from the start. This weekend we're going on a sort of Friday to Monday holiday. So next week is going to be a 4-day week max, and it could be a little bit less than that because of more of this stuff to do with moving stuff between houses. And then the week after that, one of our sets of grandparents who looks after the kids on a Wednesday, they're away on holiday, so I'm going to have to do childcare on the Wednesday. And by the end of that week, it's going to be 7 weeks in a row that I haven't managed to do a full 5-day work week, which is really problematic. But it's life, and the fact is my wife works, and although I have this stash of money which I'm using to contribute to our family finances whilst I try and get this business up and running, the only person in the household who is actually dynamically earning money at the moment is my wife. So when we have to do these things that crop up that require one of us to be off work for a while, it does tend to be me at the moment. Which is, that's just the way things are, I suppose. It's frustrating, and so you could argue that if we had unshakable self-belief that this is going to be successful and in the future I'm going to be earning loads of money out of it, then you could argue that every day wasted at this stage has a significant economic price tag associated with it, because it's another day that it pushes out those earnings in the future. But we don't have that unshakable belief. We have more of a kind of keep your fingers crossed and see what happens level of belief. And so at the moment it kind of makes more sense for my wife to work rather than me, hence the sacrificed days. Nevertheless, I'm not too downbeat about it. I am still getting a fair bit of work done. Speaking of which, I'll get on with talking about what I did on the last working day, so Wednesday. And it was quite a good day, so I've got a few bits to get through. I will therefore try and move through them relatively snappily. So, note number one. I spent more time looking into the addition of self-referencing canonical tags by WordPress. So this is the issue that I explained a bit in the last video. Very briefly, it turns out that WordPress core adds canonical tags to every single page on every WordPress website, which I believe at some point in the not too distant past was actually kind of stated by Google as being a good thing to do. I'm not really too sure why. I know one of the benefits is it means there's no chance that someone can steal your... I read someone saying that means that there's no way that someone can steal your content essentially by literally stealing it and then adding a canonical tag to their page. But then I also read that for a canonical tag to work, a non-self... Oh my god, too complicated. So canonical tags, you need one on the parent page or the canonical page, and then you need another one on the non-canonical page pointing to the canonical page for them to work. But then that can't be the case if it's self-referencing, because there is only one page involved. So what's... I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't need to get it though, to be honest. That is a depth of technical understanding that To be honest, because I kind of like SEO and online marketing, I want to know the answer to that question, and I know as soon as I stop making this video I'm going to be tempted to have a bit more of a dive into canonical tags to the point where I fully understand them. But I also know that since what I'm actually trying to be here is a business owner, I shouldn't do that. As long as I've got superficial enough knowledge to hack my way through it and implement these tags correctly, which I think I have, then I should probably leave it there. So anyway, all that matters is the tags were being added by WordPress. And as previously reported, I was struggling to find a way of getting that to not be the case, and I wanted it to not be the case because I already had my hreflang tag implementation system in place, and I didn't want the canonical tags to interfere with that. So I found a Stack Overflow. I may have mentioned this in the last video. Apologies for any duplicate information. It's just that essentially the end of this little bit of the story is I found a solution to the problem, and in so doing I had to work through some of the bits that I previously discovered. So I found an article or a post on Stack Overflow that was to do with this issue, that had a solution that looked promising. It was essentially to put a what do they call it? It was an action, I believe they're called. I think it's a PHP thing, and the only programming languages I know anything about are HTML, CSS, and a bit of JavaScript. So forgive me if I'm making a mistake here, but I think it was called an action, and the action name was remove, and then there were a couple of what do you call them, parameters after it, which essentially specified a thing that you wanted to be removed. So in this case it was canonical tags. I'd previously copied this out of Stack Overflow and messed around trying it in WordPress, and I'd come to the conclusion it wasn't working. But what then occurred to me is what I hadn't tried doing was putting it in place and then deactivating the SEOPress plugin that I also had installed and that I had become aware was potentially inputting canonical tags itself. So this time I input that bit of code to the functions.php document in WordPress directly, and then which is going to become relevant in a second, and then turned off the SEOPress plugin, and brilliantly the canonical tags disappeared. So it turns out that's what was going on. Well, I think the reason why I didn't understand that the first time round is I think I was assuming that if WordPress core and SEOPress were both inputting canonical tags, then I would be seeing two of them. But clearly in hindsight, SEOPress is clever enough that if it sees WordPress core inputting canonical tags, it doesn't repeat them. So it was only when I removed those ones that it input them, and I thought I was just seeing the same canonical tag, and I wasn't. So that was a good start, but it meant I had to then work through a couple of other problems, namely that I needed, or perhaps it's more accurate to say wanted, to have an SEO plugin on the site in order to be able to adjust meta tags. So this means your meta title and meta description. Essentially, there are other bits of metadata, but they're the two things that I care about. They're the two most important things, certainly for my website. And you cannot adjust them using just a WordPress install. There's no way of doing it, or not directly anyway. With a bit of coding knowledge, I guess you can do whatever you want, but that's not really me. So I know to adjust meta tags within WordPress by using an SEO plugin. There was no option, or none that I could find, in SEOPress to turn off the addition of canonical tags. That would have been a very simple solution, but it didn't seem to exist as a solution, so I couldn't do that. I searched around though and found a different plugin called Simple SEO, which looks like, and now that I've messed around with it a bit, I'm fairly sure it does just do meta tags. and pleasantly it actually has a similar layout to SEOPress in terms of where it exists within WordPress and how it looks. So it took 0 time to learn how to use that. So that solved the solution of needing that functionality to still be there, which left only one remaining problem, which is that I'd input that action into the functions.php document, which you get warned against doing because the functions page of your, essentially functions in any programming language are things that execute an action. They make something happen. They're kind of, because of the nature of programming languages, pretty much every line of code is fairly important, and almost every part of a code base has the potential to mess up the program that it's coding. But certainly if you messed around with a function, it's almost certain that you're going to be screwing something up. So you're warned against messing with it at all. I have just enough programming knowledge to not be scared of just pasting someone else's code in, seeing if it works, figure it out, saving the knowledge that I'll kind of know how to remove it and reset it if I need to. So that's okay. But there's another problem, which is that every time a theme, if you're using a theme, and I am, every time that theme gets updated, it will rewrite that entire document to whatever the new document is. It doesn't add incrementally to it. It wipes off the entire old document and replaces it with the new, which means that line of code that I was adding would no longer be there when the theme gets updated. And because I paid for a theme, one of the good things about that is that it is being developed by the team who make it, and it does receive updates. I've only had it for 3 or 4 months and I've already seen it updated. So leaving that code there wasn't a possibility. I looked into using something called a child theme, which is where you basically make a copy of the theme, which means that you can, I don't quite understand what the technical interaction is between a parent theme and a child theme. All I know is that what it ends up doing is giving you a theme that you can change parts of, and when the parent theme is updated, the bits that you've changed don't get deleted, but the bits that need updating do get updated. I don't know how, but that's the way it works. But whilst I was researching that in the SEOPress, that's the name of the theme that I use, in the SEOPress documentation, I was researching child themes and came across an alternative suggestion, which is just to use a plugin to input a little bit of extra PHP. In this case, they suggested one called Code Snippets. And so I had a look at that, downloaded the plugin, had a look. It looked very, very simple to use. I tried it and it worked, so that's ended up being the solution. It's kind of essentially very similar to having a child theme. It just means that there's a separate repository for code which kind of injects it in, and it means it doesn't get affected by theme updates. It just means it's a sort of an even smaller, kind of lighter weight way of doing things than using a child theme. It's just for this specific usage. I suppose, excuse me, in theory what could happen if you keep doing stuff like that is you could end up having a separate plugin for PHP, a separate plugin for extra CSS you want to add, or maybe a bunch of other stuff that I don't even know exists at the moment. And it could get to a point where it's actually much more tidy to just have a child theme with all those documents in it. But for now, and probably for quite some time in the future, I think it suits me to just use a plugin, and maybe if I need another for something else, I'll do that as well. Okay, so that was it. Problem solved. Canonical tags gone, otherwise functionality retained. So I deleted SEOPress. I then had to manually add the existing meta tags for the pages that I already have on the site. because that data was saved in SEOPress, and I couldn't find a way of exporting it to then import it once I'd deleted the plugin. So I just had to manually transcribe those titles and descriptions. It was no big deal because I was reminded of the existence of WordPress's quick edit functionality. It's not something I ever really use. It seems that whenever I'm editing a post or a page, it's almost always the case that I need to go into it to do it. But I have noticed the quick edit option before, and it turns out for this sort of thing it's actually incredibly useful. It meant I could just stay on the one page in WordPress where you can see all of your posts, and just open the fields that I needed to change the meta titles and descriptions. So that job took maybe half an hour to do both sites, whereas it could have easily been double that time were it not for that. So I then moved on and realised that so this is in reference to the fact that I've recently cloned the site, so I now have two sites. I realised there might be some things that need to be changed in the clone site because they can't, by their very nature, be identical across the two sites. This will not be the case for any kind of content for the user. The very express purpose there is to have the two sites be identical. But I realised that, for example, Google Analytics tags needed to be different. So this is the little bit of code that you add into a site to tell Google, please track this site, this is the unique identification number, and you have the authority to record data. So because it's a unique identification number, obviously that script has to be slightly different for each site. So I sorted that out. Updraft backups, so this is the plugin that I use to save copies of the website sporadically. You have to specify where you want those copies to be saved. So again, I had to set that up again for the secondary site. What had actually happened there is, unlike with Google Analytics where it had just copy pasted, the cloning process had essentially copied the analytics script to the new site, which meant it was there, but it was wrong because it had the wrong ID number. In the case of Updraft, it had just copied the plugin, but it had not copied across the settings, which makes sense because it wasn't going to be able to use the same settings because they require authorization. But it didn't put up a warning saying that had happened. But anyway, I just had to reauthorize that again, so they're now being saved to the same folder as the other sites saves. It just needed redoing. So there was nothing else that I could see that needed changing though along those lines. It helps that at the moment the site is very small and basic. I imagine if you had a big complicated site, especially if you're doing e-commerce type stuff, there would probably be quite a lot of stuff you would have to set up if you cloned a site. One good thing I did notice is that all the internal links during the clone/migration have been changed to reflect the fact that they're on the new domain, which I suppose is kind of a minimum criteria for a viable bit of cloning software. But it would not be much use if it cloned all the internal links and actually just left them still pointing at the original site. But sometimes these things do happen. But one thing I guess I will say is that Updraft is freemium software. So the basic backing up facility within it is free, but all the add-ons you have to pay for, and cloning /site migration is an add-on, and it costs £24. Not a lot of money, seemed like a reasonable price to me, but it does mean that it is at that point paid software, and you can have very different expectations of paid software to free. So I guess the reason why I'm mentioning this fact that it properly did the internal links is because with free software you don't really know what you're getting, and it can be broken in really stupid basic ways. But this was paid, and it worked like you would expect paid software to work, so that was good. What else? We're getting towards the end, which is excellent, because I've basically got just over half a day's work today, so I'm eager to crack on with something. So I then set up a couple of benchmarking keywords for Ahrefs to track. For both sites, I'm tracking both the US and UK search engine results pages in both Google desktop and mobile. So that, if you don't know that, that is an important thing to know, is that these, as you probably do know, or common sense would dictate, even if you don't really know very much about search engines at all, if you search for a phrase in the US or the UK or anywhere else in the world, you are going to get fed different results depending on where you are. Google is, by some distance, clever enough to figure out roughly where you are, and obviously it's highly likely that you are going to actually want to see different results based on where you are in the world, so that's a useful thing. But it means that when it comes to tracking the performance of your website, you are often going to want to differentiate between the results that you're getting shown for how well your site is performing. You're going to want to break it down into different countries if your site is targeted at different countries. And also, as of I think it was a couple of years ago now, 2 or 3 years ago, Google actually have different indexes for searches completed on desktop and mobile. So every other setting could be exactly the same. And the searches that you do could be exactly the same, but if you were performing those searches on a mobile phone and a desktop computer, you will get fed different results. So if you want to know how your website is doing in different areas and on different devices, you have to specify that and set them up as different I was going to say different keywords, but no, same keyword, different tracking metrics. So the 3 keywords that I input for both of the sites, and using all of those criteria, was firstly wave to the, because it's the name of the company. Actually, you know what? Sorry, before I say these, I'm going to say a random example of what I'm not tracking. So the one category that I've already added to the site just as a title, it has no content yet, but it's the starting point, is LEDs. So it's going to be to do with products that incorporate LEDs or that are LEDs. And that it's sort of intuitive, it's kind of tempting therefore to start tracking keywords to do with LEDs, like for example LEDs. But this is a brand new site with no authority, and LEDs are a well-known product around which there is an awful lot of content on the internet, and a lot of it exists on sites with quite a lot of authority. So if I went for something as high competition and high traffic as LEDs itself, I guarantee you the page that I aim at that phrase would not achieve anything in the SERPs. It would be, I don't think it would even get indexed, in the sense that it might exist on the Google index, but as far as I'm aware, Google will only ever show you about 300 to 400 search results for a given phrase. And I wouldn't be in the top 400, so it's like I wouldn't exist for it. So at the moment, it makes sense, in order to get some idea of how I'm doing relatively early, it makes sense to track some weird phrases that I have reason to believe I might gain some kind of ranking for sooner rather than later. Okay, so with that explained, I'm tracking wave to the, partly because it's it's clearly not going to be a high volume search phrase. Although having said that, it's kind of not exactly going to be zero, in the sense that obviously it's part of a phrase, and there are going to be many examples of those 3 words in that order on the internet, albeit probably not a single one of the pages on which that phrase can be found will actually be targeted at that phrase. But nevertheless, it's going to exist multiple times, sometimes on high authority domains or pages. But it's still a weird phrase, and importantly, it is the actual name of this business. So I ought to be able to start ranking for it, even against some mid-weight competition, fairly early, because it's written all over the site. It's the domain name. So as soon as my site gains any kind of authority, I would expect to be ranking fairly highly for that phrase. The second phrase I went for was I learn basic video editing. I went for this because so now we're getting into the realms of phrases which not only are not going to be targeted by any page on the internet, which I have to just briefly caveat by saying there will be loads of pages targeting the phrase basic video editing. I don't need to research that to know that that's going to be the case. But the actual phrase I learn basic video editing is probably almost not going to exist on the internet. And in fact, I checked it out as an exact match phrase, and it only exists 6 times on the internet. So not a great deal of competition for that exact match phrase. Although there is plenty of general search competition for phrases around that, if you don't put it in as an exact match. But on the other hand, I am using it in the title of one of my pages, which gives it prominence and means that I'm targeting that phrase. So that's something to watch for. I mean, whilst I put these phrases into Ahrefs a couple of days ago, I haven't actually looked at it yet to see if I am ranking at all for any of these phrases. If I was going to have a guess, I would say that I learn basic video editing. It'll be interesting to see, actually. Yeah, maybe it's not worth speculating. I'll just have a look at it and get back to you. But I mean, I'm guessing there are only 6 exact matches for that phrase on the internet. Or, sorry, I should say in Google's index. It's not exactly the same thing. So if Ahrefs only look for how that phrase is doing as an exact match, which is that what they do? No, it's not, is it? No, they won't. There's no reason to think they do that. They'll just input it as a regular search. So okay, so probably, and they only show you up to a 100th place in the rankings. If you're above 100th place, they just say greater than 100. So my guess is at the moment, actually, all 3 of these phrases, I'm going to be greater than 100, just because whilst I'm inputting I learn basic video editing to Ahrefs, they're going to input that to Google or their own index. I'm not quite sure how it works as a non-exact match phrase, and there are going to be many more than 100 results out there, which whilst they're not that exact phrase, they still outrank me for that phrase because they outrank me so massively for parts of that phrase. Okay, so I just had to get that straight in my own head. So yeah, none of these 3 phrases I suspect I'll rank for at all at the moment. So phrase number 3 is Grandma gifts me a day. So now I've gone right to the extreme of the existence of a phrase on the internet. I checked it as an exact match, and not too surprisingly, that exact phrase does not exist anywhere on the internet apart from on my website. So whilst it's not a title of one of my pages, I'm not targeting that phrase. It is literally unique to my website, and therefore another good one to track just to get an initial understanding of the authority of the website over the next few months. Okay, that's it. That was actually quite a long video, but that's just because I made a bit of progress and therefore had a few things to talk about. And I will catch you later. Bye.